welcome to our, this is our second session of the day in our Ibecc competition. Today we have some great students from California State Chico who are going to talk to us today about hospital pricing for the uninsured. Certainly a very, very timely topic. We have Jordan Draper, we have Mark Gaynor, and we have Jeremy McNutt joining us. The advisor today is Professor Eric Campbell. Welcome. And today our judges are hospital executives at a regional conference. That is the role you're going to play. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, I'd sure appreciate that, executives.
Sure. With our actual real information or with our hospital executive information?
It's up to you. It's certainly up to you. You're playing a role.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm an executive at Scripps up in La Jolla, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Yes, I'm a hospital general counsel. Alan Nico's my name. I'm sorry, I didn't say my name.
Oh yeah, Greg Schneeberger.
Okay, my name is Ruth Kraft, and I'm general counsel to the New York Hospital of Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, New York.
Thank you. And Carl?
I'm Carl Oliver, and I'm sort of an undercover judge.
Excellent. So what we will do is we'll have 30 minutes, up to 30 minutes of presentation. When my alarm goes off, we will ask you to wrap it up as quickly as you possibly can. Then we'll have 20 minutes of challenge from our four judges who will have plenty of good questions for you. And then finally after that, the judges are going to spend 10 minutes just telling you what they think, giving you some feedback after we've completed the score sheets. This would be a good time for anyone to turn their cell phones off if anybody has them on. And what I'm going to do, gentlemen, is I'm going to press the button here, and I'm going to tell you exactly when to start.
Hello, and thank you for welcoming us to your hospital conference. My name is Jordan Draper.
I'm Jeremy McNutt.
And I'm Mark Gaynor. Today, we're going to be talking about
There he is, Michael. Clicker does not seem to be working.
Oh, really?
Okay. So let me stop the clock here.
Eric, do we have ours?
It was ours on that. Oh, it's Michael. I thought that was it. I'm going to reset the clock, gentlemen. Just a second here.
One more try.
There you go.
They start again.
Yes, please start again.
hello, and thank you for welcoming us to your hospital conference. My name is Jordan Draper.
Jeremy McNutt.
And Mark Gaynor. We are as concerned with the future of the hospital industry as you are, and that's why today we are going to talk to you about a problem that's facing the uninsured Americans. Let's see. Our agenda today is we're going to have a short introduction talking about a few things, the mission statements of hospitals, our framework of analysis that we use to address this issue. Then we're going to be talking about a few business issues that seem to come up when we talk about our recommendation. We're going to be talking about how our recommendation is compliant with all current and projected laws, and is also something that can make your businesses ethically exemplary. And then afterwards, we're going to have a short Q&A section. So first off, the problem. The problem that we see is exploitative pricing structures for uninsured Americans. This seems to be based off of the charge master, which a few of you may know exactly how it works, but probably not, because it seems to be a mystifying, not well understood thing. You may know that Charge Master is just the master pricing list that is federally mandated to have, and it's just the master pricing list that all hospitals have that shows prices for all medication, all procedures, everything that the hospital needs to do to run. But as you also know, if somebody has insurance, they're not going to pay off of the Charge Master. What the Charge Master does is it gives insurance companies a place to start negotiating their pricing from. Most insurance companies are going to be billed far less than the Charge Master prices. Sometimes half, sometimes even more than that, or less than half. We have a couple examples of Charge Master prices for 3 common things you might find or get in the hospital, and then the comparative prices over here. For 1 pill of Tylenol, a single Tylenol pill, 350 milligrams, the Charge Master list is $1.50, which doesn't seem like a lot, but then when you compare the fact that a single Tylenol pill somewhere else costs a penny, that's a 15,000% increase. It does sound a little bit absurd when you say it like that. Next is a chest x-ray, which Charge Master would charge $283. Medicare, which covers doctor costs, procedure costs, overhead for the hospitals, as well as a small margin for profit, is only going to pay $20.44. And Rivixan, which is a common cancer medication, Charge Master list is $13,702, and the cost to the hospital to get that medication is only $4,000. Again, some of this doesn't seem crazy, like the $1.50, but when you start stacking it up on larger and larger prices, it does seem a little bit absurd in some sense. Now, our recommendation is to reconfigure prices just for the uninsured to be no more than the lowest price paid by a private insurance company. I'm going to be moving on into the business portion of my presentation. First, I'm going to be talking about the mission and framework, like I said, and then seeming losses from the uninsured, the hospital image, and hospital culture, if our recommendation is adopted. Again, the first thing you guys want to know about is, of course, every hospital has a mission statement. It's the way that they go about their business. It's the way that they approach their work. And while each mission statement is unique, there seems to be a lot of commonalities, a lot of common themes between every mission statement at every large hospital. And a lot of those things are going to be worded such as to serve the underserved in the community, to help the poor, to help the least advantaged. Current Charge Master pricing structures do not really reflect this because those people which the mission statements refer to are actually the kind of people which the Charge Master seems to exploit. Next, our framework of analysis. Lynn Sharp Payne wrote a book called Value Shift. She's the assistant dean of Harvard Business, and she's pretty much the most knowledgeable person on this subject. And she thinks that there is a place for ethics in business that can help businesses to actually see profits and become ethically minded, and it doesn't hurt the business in any shape or form. Now, the first issue that I brought up is potential losses from the uninsured. This seems to be commonsensical. If you lower prices, then you're going to lower revenue. But this doesn't quite work when it comes to uninsured Americans. With uninsured Americans, 55% of all the care they receive in an average year goes uncompensated. That means the hospital doesn't see a single dollar. In a business where uninsured Americans are actually getting $100 billion in care on average, that's a lot of money. That's something that we all need to think about. So of the 45% that does actually get compensated, only 30 to 35% of that the hospital, or 70 to 50% of that the hospital will ever see, because they then have to send that to collection agencies. With these uninsured Americans, you're going to see on one hand the hospital bills that they've incurred, and on the other hand paying rent and putting food on the table. And of course, they're not going to think, oh, I really got to pay my, hospital bills if it means going without food for a couple of months. So what does this actually show? Hospitals, if they lowered prices, will increase the pool of people who can actually try to pay their bills off. And the losses that the hospital does see from helping uninsured Americans is actually lowered. So you're going to see more acceptable losses. And that does seem counterintuitive because you are lowering prices, but there's more people that will be able to pay. Moving on to the second issue, the image to the hospital will be increased. You'll be recognized as having a commitment to the community. Every hospital, when we understand that all hospitals provide a vital service to the community, every community needs some sort of a health provider. You can't have a healthy society without healthy people. And we also understand that there's an economic benefit to your communities as well. Every hospital is going to be employing many, many people across vast disciplines, although all under the medical term. But as you may have heard, Stephen Brill recently came out with an article in Time magazine called Bitter Pill. He points out that there are a lot of less than satisfactory ideas about the way that the hospital industry is seen. And if you lower prices, well, first let me take a step back. The image that Brill talks about seems to all be based off of the idea of this exploitative pricing structure. Everybody seems to think that prices are too high for people who don't have insurance, and they're the ones who are getting dinged by going to see the care, that they're going to receive the care that they get. By lowering the prices, you will increase the image of the hospital because you'll be recognized as having a commitment to the community. This leads into the transparency part. You'll be recognized as being honest, upfront, and inviting. This is something that the charge master definitely isn't. In the federally mandated patient bill of rights, every hospital is supposed to provide a written statement before procedures performed or medication is given, and this pricing list is essentially a printout from the charge master. The charge master is filled with lines of code. It's not made to be read by normal people. It's made to be read by insurance companies who can then plug their codes directly into some sort of a database. By making it easier to understand and lowering prices, you will be recognized as being honest, upfront, and inviting. And this is something that, of course, you want to be already, and we know most hospitals are, but there are some people out there who don't feel so. And last, for this image issue, is trust. You'll be recognized as a trustworthy business. People want to do business with somebody that they think is going to be honest, upfront, someone that they feel is going to be looking out for their needs, not the bottom line, but the bottom bracket of patients, particularly with the uninsured. On to the third issue. Improvements in hospital culture, both internal and external. As you all know, every department has needs. Every department in your hospital has wants. Sometimes these wants conflict and sometimes they outright clash. By streamlining the process or trimming the fat off the process, you're making it much easier for these hospital people to interact with one another and for the different departments to get what they want and to get it quickly and easily. Also, on the external hospital culture, if you're very upfront, honest, and rigid about these pricings, then other people outside of the hospital that need to do business with the hospital, such as somebody trying to sell an MRI machine or trying to get your hospital to adopt a new cancer medication, if you're honest and upfront and you're very rigid, then there's going to be no question. People want to do business with somebody that they know exactly the outcome of the conversation. You want to know that you're going to get a particular product at a particular price and it's going to be done in such and such a way.
moving into the legal issues section, I'm going to be discussing some of the possible legal concerns, and one of the main ones is how this could be affected by the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. We know that this has been, landmark legislation that's been passed that contains numerous amounts, or thousands of pages of regulations, and can probably pose some problems if just recommendations from random consultants are taken at leisure. So we're here to defend our proposition to you guys. And second, we're going to discuss the possible tax exemption concerns that could exist in the status quo for hospitals, as well as how our proposition might help alleviate some of those concerns. All right. So Section 9007 of the Affordable Care Act was amended after the original language was that they should charge the amount, not charge more than to the average of the lowest three. But they amended it in Section 10,903 to say that it limits the amounts charged for emergency or other medically necessary care to not more than the amounts generally billed to individuals who have insurance covering such care. And we think that the generally billed notion is interesting, and that it's a positive movement for nonprofits. And we think, however, that we can do more, and that our proposal actually would meet the criteria of 9007 without any of the nebulous nature of generally billed. We think that if we go to the lowest amount, that we can avoid any possible lawsuits, in the sense that there will be no question that it's less than the amount generally billed. Next is another provision of the Affordable Care Act is that it prohibits the use of gross charges. And there's currently a lawsuit going on in North Carolina right now where they're trying to charge a man roughly $300,000 for a 3-day stay when he was undergoing some routine exams and had to get a couple of special doctors to look at his tests. And he's trying to argue that the actual cost of the hospital is somewhere around $20,000, and they're trying to charge him roughly, $300. And he's claiming that this is a gross charge. And while this term gross charge has not been completely and clearly explicated in the Affordable Care Act, this case might set a standard that hospitals would have to conform to. And by adopting our proposal, we can actually limit the possibility of being charged under the same lawsuit. For instance, if you were charging $4,000 for a chest exam, as would be outrageous, but it's conceivable given the past that we've demonstrated. And if that were to be done, you can argue that this new court case could set precedent for why you could be sued. And even using the standard rate of inflation of roughly 80 to 200% off Medicare price can still be considered a gross charge. Next, we talked about a little bit earlier about how the average of the lowest 3 negotiated rates was in the original, and we wanted to discuss how that actually is the most reasonable option if you're not going to adopt our proposal. We think that when we change it to 10,903B, which is the revision that's the amounts generally billed, we think that distracts away from the issue and allows hospitals too much wiggle room to where they can really be vulnerable to lawsuits. We think that if you are not going to adopt our proposal to the amounts, the least amount billed, that at least refer back to the language of 9007. And we want to point out also that part of the reason that it was revised was because of this hospital lobby pushing back, and they were trying to argue that the mean of the 3 lowest was going to be too hard to determine, it would put too much burden on hospitals. But there was no real substantive discussion of the economics of it. It was more of kind of a gut reaction of a special interest group trying to shut down the Affordable Care Act, which was already in a position of tumultuous position, And so another thing is that assistance in the Affordable Care Act must, for a nonprofit hospital specifically, must include reduced or free care options. We think that in the current situation, we see that there are these options available, but they're not made widely known. They're not known enough to the people who want to get these procedures done. which leads us into what the community health needs assessment solves. If it is a legal mandate, the hospitals have to conduct a community health needs assessment where they determine what the particular needs of their community are, how they can serve those needs, how they can make those public, how they can further ensure that the public knows where to go to get what they need done, and generally what it's going to cost them, or what they should be prepared for. And so in specific demographics or areas or locations, there might be different specialties that a hospital may choose to better serve the needs of that particular community. And we feel that using that community health needs assessment, we can also, in the measures to inform communities of hospital services, inform them that that there are reduced options available. This will be much easier than telling them you might get a discount from the charge master, which might not make sense and might open up some possibilities for them to sue. Whereas if they are made clear that you will pay what the lowest negotiated private insurance price is, there's no ambiguity about what they should expect to be paying. There's no real wiggle room as far as what they should be expecting. Next, and probably very important to the hospital because it's almost damnation for a nonprofit, is that if you are pursuing payment via the collection agencies like we talked about in the business section, there has to be a few things that have to happen. One is that the party must be sufficiently informed and they have to know about the discounted options available. Our position allows these to be made clear and for the parties that are being pursued to understand more thoroughly, and for a more streamlined approach to telling them about these options. And also it prohibits extraordinary and coercive measures. Not that any of these hospitals would engage in that, but we think that the argument to be made for that can be made, can be shut down pretty convincingly by noting that this is exactly our policy on pricing. It's not coercive. The way we're going to go about it is not coercive. I think that the legal defense of that is pretty strong. And the IRS can pursue and revoke the tax-exempt status of a hospital if they choose to not follow these mandates. Not our recommendation, to be clear, but if they decide to not follow the mandates regarding their pursuit of uncollected payments. And if it turned, they kind of view it as a hospital being a bully or somebody who's being kind of like a loan shark who's coming out to break your knees because you didn't pay on time. And we feel that that's not the hospital's primary purpose, and that there's more to what a hospital does than just collecting bills and trying to kind of generate the most profit possible, which leads us directly into the ethics of our case, which my partner will discuss next.
So, in looking at the moral issues at play and the moral reasons that we think should motivate the actions of hospitals, I'm going to talk about considerations of both justice and virtue, what it means to actually respect patients as persons, and to the obligations of hospitals to promote and sustain the welfare of the community. So here is a cost routine of routine EKG. This is a test that's very commonly done. It checks the palpitations of the heart of a patient. It's used to determine whether their heart's beating at a normal rate. So this isn't all that much by itself. It's $80 or so, $75 for uninsured patients. But people who have Medicaid pay around $6. People who have Medicare pay $7.50. And so what should be shocking here is that Medicare actually takes into consideration the regional differences in cost of living. It takes into consideration the cost of the hospital incurred in performing a procedure. It takes into account a small margin of profit and allocates that into the funding for Medicare. So if we were to restrict our recommendation purely to what could be morally sanctioned, then we think that Medicare is probably the obligatory option. However, we recognize that there are considerations and interests that should be allocated to businesses. And so what we're recommending is that hospitals actually adopt something around standard insurance rate for the uninsured. So part of what is extremely morally troubling about the charge master is that it doesn't actually take into consideration the material costs incurred to the hospital and factor its charges from there. It operates on the basis of a system set up 20 to 30 some years ago, and it does routine inflation on that, and so it doesn't take into account the changes that have arisen from developing technology, the fact that over time our technology has actually improved and made many of the things that hospitals charge for cheaper. For example, a hospital a few years ago went to a provider of fMRI machines, and they had just operated on a standard inflation model, but the cost of making an fMRI machine has actually gone down, and they haven't taken that into consideration. And the same thing happens with the charge master. So this is actually completely detached from material considerations, and so they're actually exploiting the uninsured. And not only are they exploiting the uninsured, but they're exploiting smaller insurance companies, because this is the price that smaller insurance companies pay is actually negotiated down from the charge master. So it's not actually taken into consideration the material cost incurred by the hospital, the regional costs of living, or anything else that can be pointed to and said, this is why we're doing this. So if we're evaluating this from the perspective of justice as equality, the fact that uninsured patients don't have insurance doesn't mean that we can actually go and exploit them. And this seems arguably what we are doing if we continue to use charge masters. From the perspective of justice as fairness, uninsured patients haven't done anything to deserve this extra charge. Many uninsured Americans are working full-time, they get minimum wage, they have families to provide for, and they contribute to their communities, but they can't afford to pay for insurance that would actually be able to provide for them and lower the costs that they see when they go to hospitals. So if we're looking at the virtues of institutions and examining this from virtue theory, institutions have certain roles to play in society. They have abilities that determine what a virtuous institution should do. So when we're considering how a hospital should actually interact with the rest of its community, we need to consider what it can do and what virtues it can foster in the community and what virtues it can exemplify. Hospitals have the ability to combat disease. They have the ability to promote the general welfare of a community. They have the ability to inform a community's members about how to live a healthier lifestyle. And when they allow profit motivations to guide them rather than the ends of promoting these virtues, then we think there's something significantly lost, and the hospital to some extent divorces itself from the considerations of the flourishing of a community, and that's a significant loss to the community. So additionally, what's troubling here is that from a moral point of view, it's morally obligatory to respect persons and patients, by extension, as moral agents and moral patients worthy of consideration of their own right, not just merely as tools to achieve one's own aims. And when you use patients just as kind of monetary vehicles to reach the best profit margins, then there's a failure to actually see those patients as having aims of their own that are worthy of respect and worthy of promoting in their own right. Additionally, many people don't have the ability to autonomously consent to the economic practices that are forced upon them in these situations. A person doesn't go to a hospital always because she shopped around, she has full information about the various costs that she would pay in competing hospitals, and she knows the costs, she knows all the relevant information. Many times one goes to the hospital because one's health condition has pushed her to the point where it's necessary in order to preserve her own health that she does that now. So basically, what becomes problematic here is that this isn't something we can just analyze as a free market case. Patients don't have the ability to make completely free choices about this. It's not as though one's shopping around for a car in this case. This is very much akin to someone, well, okay, so someone loses, someone gets in a car crash and then has to go to the hospital. She can't choose which hospital she goes to. She can't be relevantly informed about what she's going to pay for that in advance. And she's left basically to the mercy of the hospital as an institution. And we can see this akin to a person going into, a child going into a candy store and not knowing the pricing that is actually set up and is the MSRP. And so the hospital charges her $20 for a lollipop. So finally, we think that if we actually don't take into consideration our own personal interests, we look at the interests of everyone in the community and we try to give them equal consideration, then we'll recognize that the current practices are actually detrimental to promoting those impartial interests and to giving everybody equal considerability and to promoting what seems to be best for our community. This is explicit in a regressive problem that occurs by the hospital's pricing structure. As it is, the least well-off, the people who are already struggling in poverty, are charged the most. And so if they are to pay this off, then this is going to continue to keep them in poverty for years. I mean, people get charged several $100,000s for something that's completely outside of their control, that they don't have any control over, and which may arise out of no fault of their own. So we see additionally that if hospitals actually change to a model where they're trying to provide health care to uninsured patients that's more affordable so that they're paying what the lowest standard insurance company pays, then this is actually going to make it easier for people to seek health care when it's going to be most probable that the health outcomes will be best. They'll be able to seek it when they are healthier, and so when the cost to both the hospital and to themselves will be lower. So we think that choosing our option of making uninsured patients pay what the lowest standard insurance company pays is going to best achieve this. So in summary, we've argued from a business perspective that the costs incurred by adopting this new model will be acceptable, that this will actually better integrate a hospital into its community and will allow a hospital to become not only still functioning business, but an exemplary business, one that actually leads others and shows them how we can best achieve integration of business and community. From a legal perspective, we think that this will be the most parsimonious and harmonious relation between business and the current laws, and this will allow a hospital to operate in the spirit of the law. From a moral perspective, we think that this is the morally obligatory stance and allows for hospitals to actually see their patients as worthy of respect and worthy of being made better in their own right. Thank you.
20 minutes for, thank you, 20 minutes for judges. Questions?
I've got a simple one right off the bat, maybe just a clarifying question. And you probably answered this in your presentation, so forgive me, but who designs the charge master list? Does each hospital do it, or is there like an agreement among the hospitals?
Each hospital does it. It was mandated back in the 60s or 70s, and Back then, they basically set up all the prices for everything that the hospital does. They put codes for each procedure, piece of equipment, all the medication, so that insurance companies could actually use that to bill their customers. And since then, most, and by most I mean 99+% have not touched it. It's been set up to be automatically increased according to foreseen or supposedly foreseen inflation in the medical industry.
15,000%.
15,000%. Back when they made it, I'm sure a pill of Tylenol costs significantly more than it does in 2013.
Each hospital has their own list that they can revise if and when they want.
Right.
I have a question for you. In your written presentation, you state the following, which I think you stated during the presentation as well. The recommended pricing, reflecting what the hospital is willing to negotiate with a private insurance company, means that the needs of the hospital will be met. Now that was stated. How do we know that that's actually the case? How do you know whether we as hospitals can really run off of what delightful insurance companies such as Oxford Health Plan are paying us, which is 60% less than what they were paying us 3 years ago? How do you know that we will be able to survive? And I come from a part of the world where 4 major hospitals in Brooklyn have shut down in the last year because of bankruptcies. How do you know that we can survive off of what these private carriers are paying? Medicare pays more than the private carriers in my state. Okay? So, because traditional indemnity policies are gone. It's all managed care, and they're managing to choke us. So where did this come from? Where is this assumption coming from that that will meet our needs as a hospital in order to pay our salaries and negotiate with our unions and pay our residents and deliver quality care?
So, what we found is that generally the standard insurance is at least 20 to 30% larger than Medicare. If it's the case that Medicare actually exceeds that, then we would fully support using the Medicare pricing structure instead. We chose to advise for the standard insurance companies because it was larger than Medicare, and so it allowed for a profit margin above Medicare.
So what databases were you using for this, if I can ask? Was this based on California, on Medi-Cal?
Yeah, so we looked at California. We also looked at the information found in Stephen Bill's article. We looked around at some others.
Well, I went to law school with him. How do you know that he tells the truth? He was a very controversial guy back in the day. FYI.
I did know.
Okay. Let me ask you another one. I'm going to direct it to the gentleman who's next to you. I think you said one of the two of you referred to the hospital's collection agencies and how they charge more, but then they're giving away a piece of it. How do you know that we use collection agencies? My hospital does it in-house. We're not giving away 30% to some outside entity. We have our own collections people in accordance with the law. So where'd that one come from?
Most hospitals, up until very recently, did not do that. They sent out their work to outside collections agencies, and those are the collection sharks that we hear about.
We have our own inside sharks. They're called lawyers.
And they have to pay you, though, is part of the problem. And so...
Also, why would you equate a write-off with a loss? In other words, a business loss, means that my income is not equal to my expenses.
Right.
Whereas if I charge a certain amount and I write it off to bad debts or something else, maybe I'm getting a tax benefit from that write-off.
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. I've got more questions, but I'll let these other guys get a word in.
So,
Executive Amigo?
yes,
Go for it.
getting a pat on the back. So, isn't it, from the business perspective, any of you can respond, isn't it true that in many cases, an uninsured can negotiate, and in some situations actually do better than those under a contracted insurance rate.
I have not found any information regarding that. From what I have been able to find is some people do try to negotiate with the hospitals, and they are usually unsuccessful completely. And so they can sometimes, and you do see this sort of side industry starting to pop up the last couple of years, of people sending their bills and claims to outside lawyers and having the lawyer negotiate with the hospital. And that lawyer will sometimes be able to take off a few percentage of the bill, a few percentage points of the bill, but compared to what even a small insurance company would pay for the same thing, they don't have bargaining power because the lawyer is not bringing in a large number of patients that the hospital can see revenue from.
If you don't mind, I would like to add a little bit to that.
Yes, please.
Also, I think that it's important to note that there's an unnecessary middle step there, possibly in some instances or many instances, and that we feel that why force the uninsured who may or may not have the capacity to negotiate or to find a lawyer or to understand the channels to do that. Some of them don't even speak English. Some of them don't understand what's going on. The least well off generally, we can argue that maybe some of them have a lot of money and that's why they don't have insurance, but those are the outside cases. The majority are the ones who do not have the ability or possibly do not have the ability to contact these kind of mediator forces. And I feel like if we have this kind of middle step and we resort to saying that we allow them to negotiate, it's just putting up kind of a red herring. And that if we really do care and we're going to allow them to negotiate, why not just cut out that and just cut back to what we're willing to accept as hospitals?
What about people that just can't pay? They're impecunious, they're so poor they have nothing, and they don't have insurance. They elected under the Affordable Care Act made a choice not to have any coverage whatsoever, and they just don't have it. They're making minimum wage, they're living from paycheck to paycheck. What about these people? Who's going to pay that? How would your proposal address those folks?
If you can just jump in. Under the Affordable Care Act, approximately 30 to 40 million people will actually still not have medical coverage. And hospitals, particularly, although I'm not sure if this came up too clearly in our presentation, but we were talking primarily to nonprofit hospitals. To keep nonprofit status, a hospital has to have a certain amount of community benefit work, and I'm not exactly sure how each hospital words it, but essentially they need to give free care to some people. By lowering costs for the uninsured, you will, like I said in my part of the presentation, you will raise the amount of people who can actually pay, and hospitals will need to pick and choose less when they decide who they give free care to.
And why is that they're able to pick and choose? I'm not sure if I follow.
Yeah, because right now there's enough uninsured people who can't make payments that they have to sort of judiciously pick who they're going to give free care to. And by giving more people the ability to pay, there's going to be a smaller amount of people who can't pay at all.
But the first thing that happens in a hospital in New York, if a person says they can't pay, is that the hospital has an entire team of Medicaid specialists who process their Medicaid applications retrospectively so that we can get paid. So why should we be lowering our prices as a priority? Why should that be a higher priority than having my team work on public health and community initiatives and creating opportunities for people in terms of wellness initiatives?
As we said earlier, if it is the case that they can get Medicaid or Medicare, then they should do that. That should be the priority.
Okay.
And so, hypothetically, there would be a problem there.
So let me ask you another another one. My hospital actively advertises outside the United States in places that actually have comprehensive total health insurance for their citizens. For example, in England. But in England, if you're over 65 years old and you need a kidney transplant, the answer is simply, we have made a cost-benefit decision that say goodbye, go into renal failure quietly. If dialysis doesn't do it for you, you cannot have a transplant. I mean, they have made these hard decisions that we as a society have chosen not to make. So my question to you now is, since my hospital is willing to take a 75-year-old from London who has the ability to pay for his or her own care and say, come on over to us, we have the highest standards of medical care in the world in transplant surgery. Columbia Presbyterian is known for heart transplantation, for renal transplants. You come here, okay, Prince Charles, and we will pay us, but we're setting the rate. And that rate may be a rate that looks like it's 1,000% more than you pay for a Tylenol, but we're making the opportunity for that care available to this individual who lacks insurance, okay?
Right.
And their own country isn't doing it. Why can't we use that as a basis for making profit that we then use and apply toward our shortfalls in all of our treating domestic people who make too much for Medicaid but don't make enough to pay us?
Right, because in a sense you're capitalizing on the fact that a 65-year-old man is going to die.
What's wrong?
Yeah.
Well, his own country is doing the opposite and saying, "Good, go and die."
Right, but
why shouldn't we? What's wrong with us doing that?
So we think one of the problems with that is that birthplace is largely a matter of luck. One doesn't choose where she's born. And so when we actually set up what seems to be an exploitative pricing structure and make it so that people who are born outside of the United States have to pay exponentially more than anyone who lives within the United States.
Well, let me make this clear. I'm not talking about a situation where someone happens to be here as a tourist, falls and breaks their hips, and we say, hooray, we're going to charge 1,000% more to you. But if someone chooses to have a procedure that's elective and they choose to come to us, specifically because we're the pros and their own country isn't giving it to them at any price, why should we charge them somehow a limiting charge of what the average of what a managed company, which is paying us less so we can skim off more profits for its own shareholders, why should we make that rate relative to the rate that these managed care companies are paying us?
Right. Okay. So part of the reason we think that is because the option we're advocating is, at least for the most part, conducive with hospitals making profits. The reasons we don't think this should be allowed to be done as a purely free market enterprise is because this has to do with the health of people, and we think that we should generally have compassion for the well-being.
Okay, so Prince Charles comes. He's the Crown Prince of England. He is worth, can we stipulate, because we've had a lot of assumptions here, billions of dollars, and we're going to say to him, okay, well, Oxford and United pay $300 a day, so that's what we want you to pay. He's not one of our citizens. He's not here because something befell him in the U.S. He's flying his private jet over, and we're going to charge him that rate, and somehow that, what's the ethical imperative there?
I think there's two things. One is that if he is in the situation where he's coming because he's needing a kidney or some medically necessary procedure for his life, then I think it would be wrong to charge him like exorbitant amounts just because he can pay it. There's no reason to. That seems just ludicrous. It's like...
But what makes us, as a hospital, as Columbia Presbyterian, the moral, take the moral imperative, when his own country, his entire healthcare system in his own country doesn't make it available to him?
Right, okay, and so it's not the hospital's job to make up for all of the failures of every other country. But I believe that you can say that the community that you are serving, you owe some sense debt to them.
To Prince Charles?
No, I'm kidding. Okay, so you owe a debt to them. That's pretty much, or not a debt, but there's a relationship there. Simultaneously, you don't owe a debt to somebody like Prince Charles if he's coming to get cosmetic surgery. But if there's some situation where you can even recognize that somebody's in dire need of a medical procedure, and you decide as an organization that, well, somebody's going to die if they don't get this procedure, let's see how much he'll pay. That to me is quite exploitative.
Okay, now my hospital and many others have programs where various chairmen of departments get letters. For example, when we separated conjoined twins a couple of years ago from Peru, and they were flown up. They were in the hospital for more than a year. I think there were 40 doctors in the operating room. It cost the hospital $2 million to treat these two little girls, save them both, okay? I understand why we would want to do that as serving a larger community beyond our borders of the state or even the United States. But if someone is the Emir or the Sultan of Brunei or the Crown Prince of England, why should we extend that same rationale to them?
We don't feel that you need to take a loss.
But what if charging them something that they can more than adequately pay subsidizes 10 separations of conjoined twins, or treatment of someone who's
That
had
would be
who's had a tragic illness or a disease.
Okay, so first, we don't think there's a strong moral distinction that's generated by being born elsewhere. So what we do think, however, is that if we're going to choose a stance saying that we think that people who are over 65 still deserve care and other countries disagree with us about that, then we should at least try to be systematic in our behavior. And so if we think that people over 65 still deserve care, then we should try to provide them with care regardless of where they are. And if we can do that without significant losses to ourselves, as it seems to be the case with like Prince Charles needing a kidney, then we can do that, and we can treat him as a moral patient, and to simply see him as being kind of an outsider because he wasn't born here seems to be kind of failing to actually see him as equally worthy of moral consideration as any patient within the U.S.
There was a point in one of the slides, close to the end, where you were, it was just either just above or below the issue of consent, or the ability to understand, if someone was looking for an operation and it's a critical operation, they don't get to price shop. And right under or above that, there was something about how patients and insurance companies could be exploited. Well, excuse me, but insurance companies in our industry are the ones who are doing the exploiting.
Right.
Where did that come from, and can you tell me why you perceived an insurance company as being exploited by us?
Yeah, so we think it's the smaller insurance companies, the ones that have fewer patients who, what?
The other one, the bigger ones have all exploited them and taken them out of business.
There's a few left, maybe.
Okay.
So the ones that are smaller, that don't have the ability to actually bargain from Medicare, but instead have to bargain from the charge master, and so are able to get slightly lesser costs incurred than the charge master, but are largely exorbitant when you're looking at it from the perspective of the Medicare costs.
I've got one more for you guys. If a person opts out of coverage that's offered by their employer because they decide that they would rather go on a cruise every year than pay for health insurance for their family, or they're young, like you guys, what's the odds of something bad happening? So they opt out. Why would it be morally wrong to charge them more for care? Maybe wouldn't that be an incentive going forward for the light bulb to go on to say, yes, I really do need to opt into my employer offered health insurance program?
Right. Well, so I think similarly, you could say if someone has insurance and they keep like trying to jump off cliffs or something, then we might be hesitant about actually wanting to continually provide care for them, because it seems like they're actually not cognizant of the reasons we're providing care in the first place, and they don't actually agree with the kind of basic foundations that it would be better if they're healthier and actually contributing to like community goals and stuff. They instead seem to be interested in jumping off the cliffs.
Thank you, team. Thank you for the answers. We're going to move into feedback now. I need to ask you, are you a competitor?
No,
Okay, then you are absolutely welcome to stay, and you're welcome to stay too. 10 minutes of feedback from the presentation.
You did a good job. So this is feedback time?
Yes,
Oh, sorry. Okay.
on anything. 10 minutes of feedback.
So, thought you did a great job responding to, if you notice, she's an actual judge.
I'm an actual
In
judge.
court.
Really?
She's been, yeah.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell.
So, so
There's
you-
bathrooms over there, just so you know.
many lawyers would have
I have them
challenging-
shaking in their shoes.
Yes, she's good. So
Thank you.
she did an excellent job. I thought you did an excellent job on a couple of those questions, really defending your position well under some very harsh, brutal attack. Number two, I felt that when you made your presentation, the marketing, I thought they were good arguments. I love the marketing kind of piece that you put into the business. To me, that was marketing, you know, image, trust, transparency, all that stuff. I thought those were great arguments. I really liked that a lot. And I like the pricing certainty argument.
Which one?
I call it pricing certainty, so,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. One thing in the business area, one reaction I had that I kind of felt like, why isn't that in there somewhere, is show us, can you just model, even if it's a real simple model, a financial, here's why this demonstrates that the losses will be acceptable. We've modeled it, we've attempted to make, and yeah, we made some assumptions, models have assumptions, and somehow demonstrate, because numbers make a difference to people, especially people in business, nonprofit business. So that would be one suggestion I would have made. One thing I would have considered doing. In the legal area, I'm not sure it's because I'm not an expert in healthcare law or because I was just having trouble, but I was having trouble following a lot of the arguments. It was very, it was challenging for me to keep up with your, I think you covered all of them. I think the one risk that I would have added was, and maybe you did and I just didn't catch it, was the insurance companies complaining because they have some kind of contractual protection, right?
Yeah.
Some kind of most favored, sometimes they call it in the
Most favored
contract,
nation.
most favored nation clause. It says, you have to give me the best pricing, you give the same pricing, you know what I'm trying to say, that anybody else gets. So that would have been one argument that, and it was suggested actually in your executive summary.
It was in there earlier.
And did you cover the one on not-for-profit hospitals, that the pricing structure that is required by the Affordable Care Act for not-for-profit, that for-profit should also?
Yeah.
You got into that? Okay. I thought you did. The other thing that you got close to it, but I wasn't clear to me it got touched on, was hospitals that sell the account receivable to these collectors or bad debt buyers for pennies on the dollar. You know, what's the implication of that? Does it have an implication here? Something to think about. And then I put that in legal, maybe that's more business, don't know. And then on the ethical side, aren't the Medicare rates in some cases below market? And maybe you covered this because you said we wouldn't suggest going to Medicare, we go with the
There's
big
supposed to
insurance
be
company.
a factor to take into account the cost to the hospital performing the procedure, the regional cost of living that they need to pay out to their employees, and a small margin of profit. So at least, well, in theory, the Medicare costs are supposed to be profitable to the hospitals.
Okay. And let's see, one or two more comments. I like the argument on exploiting the smaller insurance companies. I actually like that. And I like the justice argument, that it's unfair to uninsured patients. Yeah, I liked a lot of the ethical arguments. I thought they were good. The virtue one. And I really like the patients aren't informed on price and patients don't have an opportunity necessarily in an emergency to. That was good. That was compelling to me. And one thing that kind of scratched my head a little bit is why not argue it's just plain unethical to charge more than a fair price, of fair market value, or what your cost is plus a small markup. Something to think about. That was an argument that I kind of crossed my mind I would have made in there.
Okay, so my comments.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I got a bunch.
Oh,
You have a bunch,
please,
too?
no.
First of all, great job. Extra points on the bow tie. Sorry. Style. Business ethics, perception.
Well, my husband's a surgeon, so surgeons who wear bow ties are more ethical than surgeons who wear long
We make that argument.
I appreciate that you guys stated your sort of philosophical perspective on virtue ethics at the outset. As a hospital executive with a few undergrad philosophy classes under my belt, I probably would have liked to hear a little bit more by way of, now you don't need to state it in these terms, right? But I was listening for, have you considered, first of all, that in our society, you're treating the hospitals as a free moral agent. That's a leap, number one. Or the hospital to be considered as a person. But let's go there. Then what is flourishing in our society? I understand that you're kind of attempting a reductio against the idea of, the free market, the invisible hand, power, money as a definition of flourishing, but that's also the milieu in which you're having to work philosophically when you're talking to hospital executives. And so if you kind of want to change that system, then I think you have to maybe address it a little bit more clearly. I just heard a lot of what I would consider to be kind of moral idealism, kind of in this ideal world of Aristotelian virtue ethics. And I know a lot of this has resurfaced, the Renaissance of virtue ethics, late 20th century, but just a lot of intuitions about goodness that I'm not sure really hold water, especially for treating corporations as free moral agents. And so the other normative views of ethics, if you're going to take a normative view, I wanted to hear, how are you going to answer the consequentials? How are you going to convince me about your version of virtue ethics? And why is it not better? First of all, I don't know a lot about who and who can't get insurance. Perhaps a fact of my privilege, all of our privilege. But I was at least under the assumption that if someone was willing to go through the ropes, jump through the hoops, do the paperwork, stand in the long, crazy line in the weird government building, then you could, in theory, get insurance. So as a hospital, as a free moral agent, I want to know, why is it not actually setting up an incentivized benefit consequence to people that are either too lazy or too foolish or too wanting to just, bottom feed off the system, to not say, look, there is a way to get this done. You just need to put in the work. And I liked what you said as well about, why not take some of that extra money, and if I really want to be benevolent and compassionate to those who are in such need, reverse it into programs for education, that then I, as a business, morally flourishing toward power and money, can turn into a tax write-off. And then the last thing was just, to consider within virtue ethics itself some of the possible objections. Because again, as a hospital and a free moral agent according to your system, there's been a critique of virtue ethics that it's self-centered. That as a normative ethical system, it can be kind of self-centered because it really has to do with the flourishing of the individual agent. Now, of course, if we could all just join hands with the ancient Greek philosophers and flourish together and sing Kumbaya, but I wonder if there isn't maybe a better way to develop a more robust, especially going to treat the hospital as a moral agent, like a more robust anthropology about kind of human nature involved in all this stuff. I think you need to be able to respond to that. And I have a few more things, but I think overall, you guys did a great job. It's just that I was listening. This is, this is so fancy. We get these free little books too. This is a business ethics competition, and I love that you guys addressed the ethical questions, but I was I was listening for counter arguments and counter examples based on at least my cursory understanding of virtue ethics. But overall, wonderful job.
So finally, I'm looking at this slide up there, which I love, which is the strongest visual you had in the entire presentation, and it was the last visual, not the first. And in certain years, when we were back on the Loyola campus, I remember some of the business executives who would say, if you don't get us in the first 3 minutes, it's over and done with. I thought the strongest part of the presentation was Mark. The virtue ethics, we've all touched on it. Your rejoinders to anything I threw at you were brilliant, okay? I hope you go to law school. You would stand up very, very well in a court setting. It was really a pleasure to watch that. I found myself very frustrated in the first 15 minutes because I keep writing over and over, assumptions, assuming this, assuming that. What's the basis for this? What's the data? And I objected to a lot of these assumptions because I taught law, medicine, and business at NYU as my second job as a lawyer. And so I had read, and Steve Brill is a year ahead of me at Yale Law School. And if ever there was a guy who's brilliant, he can also be a big BS artist for his own position, you pick the one. And we're brilliant. So I had real problems with these assumptions. Why are we assuming this? Why are we assuming that? I really had problems with some of the economic arguments because I thought that they were built on sand. So that kind of made me nervous. Then we turned to the legal. And I will tell you as a lawyer, nobody knows what parts of the 1,000 pages of the Affordable Care Act really mean. The definitions aren't there. It's all going to wind up being litigated. I can tell you that in the area of law that I practice now, nobody knows what changes in employment laws mean. It's all out there. So how do we base our ethical or what we're going to do ethically and what you're going to recommend to us as hospital executives on a law that doesn't yet have the, again, suppositions. We don't know where it's going. So the only way to really catch a strong argument is on the virtue ethics, the anthropological, sociological bases for how we must act as a hospital to keep ourselves alive. Because I think that part of it you didn't know, but I can tell you where I come from. This is in the news every day that the people of Brooklyn, 4 million people, are going to be left with literally 0 hospitals. Okay, and the state and the feds are all complaining, but one of the biggest hospitals is going down, and 3 went down last year. I didn't get a good sense of that. So I was thinking, I don't know about this presentation. Then we got to the ethics, and the ethics sold it for me because I thought you really gave a powerful argument. So from a point of view of presentation skills, I thought that some of that, the way it was tied down and needed to come at the very beginning of the presentation. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to need to do it. And now we're going to take you through the business, the legal, and then go back to the ethical in more detail. But I wasn't sold until the third presentation. So if you were presenting to us as businessmen, I thought that you could have lost the game earlier on. So from that kind of thing, and I know some of the teams have been coached by people who are authorities on business communication more than on business ethics. And that's the first thing that they typically do, is that they nail it in the first 3 minutes and explain in the first 3 minutes, this is our imperative, this is why we're doing it. And I wanted to see that from the first minute, because you can't look at it and be value neutral to it, right? I mean, it's that, did you make this up yourselves? Or did you get it from somewhere else?
I made it, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay? So I thought it really is strong, and I thought that should have been up there, and that should have been the basis for how you started. And then we loop back to it at the end.
Ruth, I'm sorry. Now that we're out of time, we still have one judge
Oh, I didn't
to comment. I'm sorry. No. All good comments. Carl.
You guys really knew your material well. You spoke in a line. And occasionally looked over at the charts, but you weren't using them as notes. You were just looking over there, distracted. what I think would help your delivery is just when it's your turn, step forward and speak to us. You know it's up there, that's fine. So that was one point. Second, you started out by accusing us of exploiting people. I am on the defensive immediately. What would improve your delivery, I believe, is to say, I think that as the hospital people are facing an appearance. People believe you are exploiting. And I think you need to be able to defend against that wisely. And perhaps you even need to protect yourselves against government regulation in the future that might be built upon this atmosphere of perception of exploitation. And then all your arguments make a lot more sense to me in my audience. And the third idea that I have for you is you argued that we need to build trust. I would like you to make that argument based on the values that our organization espouses. We have values. That's what we need to live up to in order to build trust. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You received a lot of very direct feedback and critical feedback, but I will say you had an extremely challenging, and you did a great job. And it was very good. I mean,
Be encouraged.
we gave you, we don't want to discourage you because we gave you a lot of very direct, but that's what I want. I know, I want direct critical feedback, and I want to be vulnerable to it so I can get better. And that's what our intent is. But overall, really great job with it. Very challenging.
Healthcare is such a challenging subject. It looks much more benign than it is. This was a very tough
The legal
subject.
alone you could have just spent. I mean, it's so hard. Right?
Years,
Thanks for not-
years. They will spend, the courts will be spending years.
Great job.
Thank you. We will excuse you so the judges can visit a little bit, but thank you so much for being part of our competition.